It's one of nature's most natural products, New Zealand honey. On the world stage, Aotearoa New Zealand is renowned for the unique quality and taste of its honeys. We have an incredibly unique environment, we're passionate about bees and respect their critical role in nature. The purity of New Zealand honey is second to none. It's natural and it's healthy, and there's such an amazing variety of beautiful flavours. It's kind of a taste tour of New Zealand from a jar. New Zealand honey is a lot like our wine. Its origins are all different and you can taste that difference because the flavour depends on the flora, the bee, climate, soil and where in New Zealand the honey comes from. So every New Zealand honey tells a different story and every harvest has its own story too. There's the KΑMAHI honey, produced from KΑMAHI trees, a feature of the South Island's rugged west coast. It's an intense flavour sensation. It's creamy and buttery and would go really well with a good camembert. Then there's Manuka honey. It's dark and earthy and a beautiful natural sweetener. I like it drizzled on fresh sourdough with real butter or with muesli and yogurt for a healthy breakfast. And the native Manuka tree offers many benefits to the environment and our people. And let's not forget the humble clover. It's found in the pastures of New Zealand farmland where sheep and cows graze in grassy paddocks. Its delicate flavour and fudge-like texture makes it a standout New Zealand honey. Absolutely beautiful. There are also honey blends that capture a mix of these botanical tastes. From native plants found in rainforests, volcanic plains and coastal areas, from light to dark, smooth and creamy to crunchy, every honey has a unique taste that's distinctive to the regions that the bees inhabit. It's all about kaitiakitanga, that's guardianship, making sure the bees' natural environment is maintained, and in turn, these bees keep our crops and forests growing while producing delicious honey. When the bees are doing well, nature is doing well. For some honey, hives are placed in remote areas where there are unique pure nectar sources. Natural and antibiotic-free, our honey is lovingly harvested, respecting what nature has perfected. And our honey is made under some of the world's strictest quality controls, right here in New Zealand. Its taste you can trace. We use technology so you can trust where the honey comes from, in some cases, right down to the bees that made it. Whether it's on your toast or your muesli, your tuppers, in your cup of tea or straight from the spoon, if you're looking for unique tastes of honey, we know a place.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure now to introduce Maureen. And Maureen, could you please pronounce your last name for me so I get it right?
It's just Conquer.
Conquer. Well, that's the way it looked, but I wasn't sure. I'm gonna take that.
Conquering is an old French name, but yes, we've conquered the honey marketing world, and I must say I didn't start with that name, but it's not a bad one. I'll keep it, except that I have to keep spelling it. So maybe I don't need to say anything more. Now you've seen the video, but and you've seen your helicopters. And people think, man, those guys must be making lots of money if they can afford to fly their hives around in a helicopter. We use old trucks. But again, by some of the footage there, you'll see that we've got very rugged country. And in order to get that premium harvest from a very remote and pristine area, this is what our guys are doing. They're picking up and taking those hives right into the mountains where no pollution is. And that way they're actually ensuring they're getting a fantastic pure product. So, sorry about that. There's a buzzer going off in the background here. Hopefully we can kill that. I have been a beekeeper, started with one hive in the back garden. It grew like crazy. And when I got up to 800, I realized I couldn't keep up with demand. So I started buying in from other beekeepers. And my background is in the wine industry and as a trained chef. And it was of great interest to me when I first started in this game, right back in the 90s, that honey from one yard didn't taste like honey from the next yard. And I couldn't quite understand why everybody just got their honey and blended it together and marketed it as a cheap commodity in a plastic container as honey, when there were so many amazing stories to be told about regional honey, seasonal honey. You know, what you're harvesting first thing in the spring is quite different to a late season honey. And of course, our monoflorals. So I got quite excited about that and started honey marketing a long time ago. Once upon a time, we had an ugly duckling in our industry. It was called Manuka honey. It was a pain. It was difficult to extract. It was dark. It was crunchy. It broke our frames trying to extract it. Tasted bitter. Didn't even taste that nice. So everybody gave it back to the bees until one of our scientists, Peter Molan, investigated a little bit of an old wives' tale that said that this honey was good for healing, and started a few experiments. And it brings that back to me, that you can say whatever you like about the honey, but you've got to back it up with evidence, and evidence that your consumers will trust. So that's really where the Manuka story started. I was amongst the first group of beekeepers that got together and threw some money at this and thought, well, let's do a little bit more research into this, this Manuka honey. And all the research that was conducted actually came out of beekeepers' pockets. And we thought, well, let's see if we can do something with this and create a story. And that's really what honey marketing's all about. It's about identifying and growing with pride your unique story. Manuka is just one of our honeys. As you saw there are other honeys. We have many wonderful indigenous honeys, different to what you get from other parts of the world. And many of them will have superb stories. And we're starting to identify that now. But when I talk to people about honey marketing around the world, it's about discovering what your unique story is. Taste that you can actually trace. So first of all, you've got to see if you've got something that's a little bit different, a little bit unique, or unique, I should say. It's not a bit unique. It's either unique or it's not. If you've got a monofloral or a special story to tell about your region, or perhaps how you harvest your honey, how you handle your bees, that's what you should be telling. Our consumers today are very conscientious, and they're increasingly mindful of the products they purchase and consume. And of course, honey is no exception to that. So you need to quite carefully identify who your customer's going to be. How do we take honey from $2.50 a kilo to $38 a kilo? There's a lot of work and a lot of pride that goes in right from that hive that we're actually tracing. The very high value medicinal honey is extracted in incredibly high-tech honey houses. I've never seen anything like it anywhere else in the world, to the honey houses that are doing that medicinal honey here. You know, I've visited honey houses around the world, and some of them are still working as 2 or 3 generations ago were doing in converted cow sheds, etc., with bees flying in and out and no real sterile conditions. Our medicinal extracting plants are fully sterile, triple doors sort of going in, our operators completely suited up, walking through disinfectant baths. COVID's not seeing anything like what happens actually in those extraction plants. And people say, how can you charge so much for your honey? It's a very expensive process to actually get that honey to that stage. It's very different to your table Manuka. And we talked about this before, that there's lots of Manuka honey out there, but it's a bit like tapping for gold. Some of it will produce the very high activity honey. Others will just be table Manuka honey. And that's something that our laboratories are helping to sift through. And of course, people like myself doing sensory analysis over the years, and working with our beekeepers can identify the difference there. When you're looking at adding value to your product, I talked a moment ago about thinking about your customer, who you're actually going to aim this for. Have a very clear picture of who that customer is going to be, and how you're actually going to market. What is their purchase drivers, so to speak? You know, is it just about price? Is it about taste? Or are there other things that are going to be very important to that customer? Is it a safe product? Do they value the integrity of that brand, that what they're saying is on the label is actually what's in the jar, which of course takes me to adulteration and fraud, which is a huge global problem. We'll talk a little more about that perhaps later. You know, the person who's buying the honey, that, you know, is this really healthy for me? I've heard that it's supposed to be good. Where do I go to get the information? Is it healthy for me? Is it healthy for my family? Is it ethical, the way it's been sourced? Maybe, is it on trend? Is this going to be something that's going to drive your consumer to actually buy your honey as opposed to somebody else's? You've got to make that individual, unique story. Every jar of honey is like a little landscape, and it has its own story. It's about the place that it's, the provenance from where it's been harvested. It's about those particular bees. It's about the integrity of the beekeeper and their beekeeping practices. It's about that particular season. It's just like vintage wine. And people are only just starting to understand that. You want to put that information on your label, have harvest dates, have vintages of honey. We'll get customers that say, oh, but I've got this jar left from last year, and you've given me another jar, and you say it's from the same apiary site, but it looks different. Yes, it's a whole year older. It's matured. It's darkened. It's changed its characteristics slightly. These are things that we need to educate our consumer about as well. So very important to actually look at what your unique story is, having someone that can perhaps, here I say, helicopter view at what you're doing and see what it is that's of interest, and can create that story around your particular product. And you've got to have absolute transparency over that product, right down, if possible, back to the hives. So you've got to believe in your product and be able to pass that message on. So there's the honey themselves that you can brand, you can do research, and many honeys. I mean, that I always say the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Romans, they knew the healing power of honey, yet they didn't have Manuka honey. So have a think about the various honeys that you're producing, and is there a unique story there? If you're getting perhaps just a multifloral honey, you haven't got the luxury of vast areas to get monofloral to wrap a story around and craft that particular story, then it might well be that you need to either develop a product, and this is something that I've done quite a bit of, is product developing using your honey. So you're adding other things to that to create another product, which as a beekeeper, you may be marketing, or you may actually partner with another producer who's using honey in their products. So very popular at the moment, boutique breweries. The artisan brewer has become hugely popular, and a lot of them are using honey to add to that story. So we've got beekeepers that are actually working and creating that joint story around beer. We've got a lot of people that are doing things like skincare products, nutraceuticals. By adding a premium honey to that with a genuine story, you're adding value to their product, and you're actually adding value to your honey as well. In New Zealand, we find that vanilla ice cream sells really well, but Apicultural honey ice cream or Manuka honey ice cream is going to sell at a much higher level and a more premium level than just straight vanilla ice cream. So whether it's honey lipsticks, whether it's honey sports drinks, whether it's new boutique chocolates that are using honey and individual honeys to create different flavors. There might be chocolates that have got crunch with things like pollen added, as well as honey in that mix. So you're growing this whole story and awareness. Every time you tap into another market, of course, you're introducing more people to your product. You know, the honey muesli bars, the honey nut bars, there are so many different products. There's honey sweet air fresheners that we have here. And so it's not just about honey, it's how you can actually pick that up, drive it, and get more people eating honey at the end of the day, and supporting your lifestyle and hopefully healthy bees. So one of the latest things that's become increasingly important, and we're doing a lot of talk about this internationally, I sit on the honey adulteration and fraud subcommittees through Apimondia, and we're really trying to push getting more country of origin labelling, making that mandatory on food products, which of course includes honey. And not just country of origin, which often means that the last person that's played with that honey or stirred the pot, so to speak, gets their name on the label. We want the percentages of all the honey that's in there. If it's a blended product that perhaps uses some honey from China as well as US honey, we want to know that. And the customer, if they can get this information, this more detailed QR codes that are going to lead them through to sites that give them this information, they're more likely to actually buy your product, believe it, and believe your brand. So there are things that I can definitely encourage to add value and help grow that return that you're going to get from your product. I think the most important thing is really building your own story and trust in the integrity of what you're doing, and as a producer, as a brand, and what you need to do. Of course, it's not just about what you say and what your website says. You need some scientific data to actually back that up. So be prepared to either go into collaboration with others on that, or spend the time and the money on proving why your story is important and true. And traceability right back to the hive. So I think that's in a nutshell is what honey marketing is all about, and then adding value to your hive. I've worked with many beekeepers to identify what their stories are, see what we can grow, And it's been very exciting to watch that, and the different markets that are identified, and our honey industry, the stats, it's just growing and growing, and the return that we get per kilo is obviously showing that work actually works. And the bonus, of course, is that we're getting more New Zealanders eating honey. We're one of the highest consumers of honey around the world. And that's a very important fact, that we're proud of that, and can actually do that. So our challenge at the moment, the top end honeys are doing extremely well. The very high priced, what I call the connoisseurs honeys, or our medicinal honeys. But now we have a lot of a surplus of what I call my everyday table honeys. So we're working on plans to actually bring honey back onto everybody's table. So that's our new challenge at the moment. And I'm looking forward to a good harvest, a good year. And I look forward to the borders opening again, so that I can fly around the world and judge honey internationally to see what exciting things are happening on the global honey market. But do we have any questions per se about honey marketing?
Oh, I haven't seen any.
Oh.
Only testing. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple at the bottom. Scroll all the way down, Frank.
Yeah. The other one I'm seeing, I was told that honey testing meeting, that honey was 20% orange nectar, can be called orange blossom. Is this correct? It's pretty easy threshold to meet.
Every country has their own specs on that. We usually work at around the 70% level before you can call it a monofloral. Being a small country, and we have a number of floral varieties here that do flower at the same time, so it's not always that easy to get monoflorals, which goes back to why people are helicoptering into remote areas. You don't want to fool your customer. If you lose their trust, very difficult to get it back. And if you've got a good customer, it's much easier to actually work and to sell them added value products than it is to get a new customer from the start. So if you're in doubt, leave it out, but create that as a story. Say that, our bees are actually in a fantastic area, that they have a wonderful buffet of nectar that they can forage from. The characteristics are coming through here, perhaps, of citrus blossom, but don't put something on your label unless you can back it up. And of course, every year might be different. So it's important that you have that flexibility in your labelling and the information that you give your consumer, that it's going to be true each year, so that you can build that trust with your consumer.
Maureen, some of the in the United States and whatnot, they do have different floral honeys at different times, and really it happens in our area as well. If beekeepers extract honey as each plant finishes, if they can get the moisture content down below 18%, you're better to do that. And the other thing that I think is presentation. Every beekeeper's got to be proud of what they produce, and they do produce the best. You don't ever put anybody else's honey down, because it's equally as good as yours. But into competition so that your quality gets higher and higher. And so you don't learn your mistakes unless you actually somebody else is judging it.
Yes, I think that's a very valid point, and we've Frank and I have been judging some honey recently, and we were certainly very aware of that. So the pride that you take right from your hive through to it goes onto the shelf is very important. I always say that every piece of work, and in this instance, it can be every jar of honey has your signature on it. Are you happy for your signature to go out on that particular jar of honey? So presentation is hugely important. And, you know, how you're not only the jar and the label, but how it's packed in there so that there's going to be some consistency. If it's an actual raw honey, you need to tell the story that this honey is going to change. It's, you know, like I say, as we mature, we often get a little bit lumpy and not quite as thin as perhaps it was when it started out. So it's going to colour and change. It doesn't mean to say that it's better or worse. It's just different as it matures. And those stories are very important to tell the consumers so that they're not concerned. I'm horrified when I hear that people start throwing honey out because it started to crystallise, for instance, or looked a bit odd in the jar. So those are things that we need to educate our customers about. But going back, really think about who your customer's going to be and how best you're going to market to them. Monoflorals are a great and an easy story, but you can wind a wonderful story about how you're either an urban beekeeper and you're in a particular area. I know beekeepers that move their hives at night on motorbikes, in lifts onto the top of the buildings, make wonderful stories. Others that perhaps are targeting golf clubs, and so they've got a story that wraps around that. You've got others that are multi-generational beekeepers, and so they can tell how that's grown over the years and how people's expectations and techniques and the machinery and the equipment that you use, how that's actually changed. How we're looking after bees in our environment today. Ethics are very, very important. You know, are we transporting the bees over long distances? Are you migrating them to lovely honey flows so that there's food and nectar available to these bees all year round? They're not being just artificially fed. So, you know, have those stories about your yards, your apiary sites, so that people can buy into that story. Possibly, yeah, it's, you know, a smaller jar of a quality product and vertical tastings. Start doing things like that. Have honey pairings as you would with wine tastings, so that, you know, if you're doing a cheese board, maybe pop down 2 different honeys to go with 2 different cheeses and get people to actually taste that difference. Take it into the schools, get people eating honey from young. It's not just about sugar. This is sugar that has sweetness to it, but it's going to add mouthfeel. It's adding a whole different level of complexity to your taste profile. It's not a hollow sweetener as sucrose or corn syrup can be. So the natural story is a very good one, and it's a true one. There's nothing quite like a good story that's actually a true story.
Maureen, part of our marketing, if you look at Manuka, that's started in 1992 and it only took off 7 or 8 years ago. So it's a long, slow process. And we took marketing differently too. We took marketing into our schools where they're doing cooking classes and whatnot, so that people started substituting water and sugar, putting honey in, and they get the different tastes. So they can bake one against the other and taste the difference and the moistness and everything else. It's a whole story that takes years to Gary. And once you get it going, it just multiplies.
That's
Maureen?
right. It is a very long story, and that's been going. Sorry, Jerry, I'll let you go on.
I found a question over under, or comment under the chat.
I've just seen
Someone says, I appreciate what New Zealand has done to stop importing honey. Unfortunately, in Canada and the US, we get the market flooded with inexpensive honeys. Our customers, unfortunately, our customers care more about price than, so how do we get our customers to understand quality and taste of local honey?
Yeah, there's, it's not just about price, and you'll find that with all products, that the conscious consumer now is very important about what they're buying. Thinks about it a great deal, and they would rather pay a little bit more for a quality product. So you've got to sell it that way, that they are getting a quality product. If you've got quality food products, you don't need as much. It's as simple as that. And we found that with, cheap food, dare I say something like a McDonald's meal, they started upsizing them because the nutritional value didn't appear to be there. It wasn't giving people that sense of satiety. Whereas if you make a hamburger at home from homemade bread and sourdough and real meat and vegetables that you've grown out of your garden, you're lucky if you can get through half the burger, a normal size burger. So it's the quality that actually makes a huge difference at the end of the day. So you have to actually get out there, and it has taken a long time. Early 90s, we started this process. I started really working at the gourmet end of the honey market, having come from the wine industry with, vintners, special reserves, private bin type wines, and seeing that you needed to sell less at a higher price, but to have that quality product to back it up. So as a beekeeper, you've got to make sure that you are producing the very best product that you can. It's not just about cheap and cheerful and volume so that you can get the return. You need to actually up value what you're doing and increase the price so that it's scale that's going there. I started working with chefs. We went in, we marketed on television, and I used to get, because we didn't have a big budget, beekeepers always seem to have short arms and very deep pockets. But so I went off and I would do a lot of free stories on television, baking on the breakfast shows perhaps, and giving free samples and teaching people about the product and what they could actually do with that. That made it very important. I really sold the story to all our top chefs, went around, gave them samples, let them taste the difference between various varieties, early season, late season, so that they could actually craft their stories around their menus. And then they would start to say, this is a sauce using Joe Blow's honey, and it's their borage honey or their Tupelo honey or whatever it happens to be that we've married with this particular local ingredient. And so you're getting double branding there all the time, and you're actually getting your name out there. So that's where you should be starting, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. I'm sorry, it doesn't happen overnight, but we've been getting there. But the big thing, of course, is as soon as you're there, other people are nipping at your heels. So you've got to keep working and making sure that you're producing the best quality product that you can, right the way through, taste that's traceable right back to the hive.
Maureen, they've got a question here. It's a very isolated beekeeper. My single source of main honey is clover. It's a non-GMO plant. They use non-GMO in the label. Your comments, please.
Wonderful. Well, that for a start has got to be a positive. So there's a lot of people that would prefer to eat food that was non-GMO. So this is, this is a wonderful point of difference. Clover is a wonderful product. It's a wonderful family honey that, and it's great in that it's, I will often categorize honeys into those, what we have as dark bush honeys that can often be very herbal, very mineral. They're like red wine honeys to very, very light, sweet floral honeys that are more like sticky dessert wines. Clover's fantastic because it sort of sits in the middle and you can do a lot of things with it either way. You can cook savory with it, you can cook sweet with it. So, but it's generally, your clover's coming from wonderful pastures and farmlands. So work with the people in your area where you're harvesting your honey. If you're getting your honey from dairy farms, or it might be a goat farm that's producing goat cheese, let's see how we can work together with these guys and produce a combined marketing story. The milk might be going out and producing a honey yogurt. So let's use your regional clover honey to actually produce that yogurt that continues the story right through. I think it's very important to build on where you are and build on that story. Clover honey makes wonderful things like clover honey fudge and candies and things like that. So these are products that you can market. But there is increasing awareness for healthy, genuine food. So if you can actually work in with maybe a custard type product or a yogurt or even a very gourmet ice cream using your product, so it becomes, Farmer Joe and Beekeeper June's honey ice cream that you're actually marketing, you'll get to spread that story a lot further.
Or and I'd also market as a regional, because clover is pretty well known throughout the years, but there's different mineral content, different everything changes. So I would actually try and market as a regional clover.
People, yep, absolutely. Regional is really important. So it's not just about floral variety. Region is hugely important now. People don't want food that's travelled halfway around the world. I mean, occasionally it's really nice for an interesting dinner party to be able to have food that's come from around the world. But in this time, we've suddenly, and COVID has done that we have reduced our worlds. And we're very proud of where we live and what we do. And people want to support local communities. So if you can actually market from your particular region and tell the story about that, it's, the farms in your particular region, get that pride in your product, but pride of provenance of where it's actually coming from is very valuable.
We've got a quick question here. Would Muka honey be marketed as comb honey?
No, not as a rule. I mean, occasionally people will do it very, very short, but it crystallizes quite quickly, and the natural crystallization is not that pleasant. It's quite sandy on the tongue. So it's not one that's good to be as a comb honey. Is my answer there. What would you say, Fred?
However, if you keep it in the deep freeze, cut your comb, keep it solid, and then take it out as it's required.
Yes.
Like that. They'll eat it before they actually crystallizes.
Absolutely, but you can't sort of have any control over that from a marketing perspective. You couldn't pack it and have it sitting on the shelf somewhere, because within a month it would be crystallized and you'd feel like you were eating sandy wax, which wouldn't be quite so pleasant. So, and Manuka generally is lightly creamed to give it a more consistent and more palatable finish.
We've got some questions here, which are generic, really. What's your country's major health obstacles with your bee health? It says foul brood, varroa, tracheal mite. More ecological, such as weather or lack of forage due to habitat losses. We're different in a way. Our problem is lack of forage due to overstocking of beehives.
It is at the moment, very much so.
We've gone,
Yes.
We're only a small country, and yet we've got about 1 million beehives, although this year we may go down about a quarter from what's going on at the moment. But because of the expansion of Manuka, the actual, everybody chasing that, they have to put their hives somewhere, and they're putting them everywhere else during the spring and autumn. And so it's affecting everybody else. So the pollen foraging is we've gone from basically beekeepers that were self-sustainable to some beekeepers that actually have to put pollen substitutes in now to keep the hives building.
Yes, that is becoming a problem, overstocking, and in our cities. But the city hives are quite an interesting conundrum as well. I mean, in the old days, the people didn't want honey harvested in the city because of the pollution. But of course now the cities are actually cleaning up their pollution, and the agri-chemicals are creating more pollution for our hives out in the countryside. This is as a global phenomenon. So yes, you're sort of looking at that, which is interesting. So another marketing edge there, really, that, you know, our cities have become so much cleaner, and that forage, I mean, I see urban beekeepers. I'm based near I'm in a rural area, but it's not too far from Auckland, which is our largest city in New Zealand. And we will get beekeepers in the city that used to get 120 kilos out of a hive. Now most of them are reduced down to about 70 max, simply because of the overstocking, because everybody wants to be a beekeeper now. They want to be healthy and have bees on rooftops and in back gardens, which is lovely, but we have to look after the bee health as well. So that's a little thing that I do on the side, actually, is sell bee-friendly wildflower seeds and kitchen garden mixes with herbs and flowering herbs and edible flowers that people can actually plant to increase the forage for bees throughout the year, because of course they need good nutrition throughout the year. And we like to look after our bees naturally in New Zealand and try and avoid artificial feeding.
Maureen, in New York City particularly, well, a friend of mine is involved with this. They've got a expanding urban beekeeping program. It's been there for quite a long time, but it seemed to be growing more in recent years. There's a trend there for high-end restaurants in the hotels and so on that are actually now pointing to the beehives on their rooftops that they're using. And my background is I've been monitoring pollutants in bees for a long time, and you're absolutely right. The urban environments have their own types of things from traffic and so on that may produce something that could get into and contaminate honey or pollen. But overall, the pesticide usage tends to be far less diverse than it is out in the agricultural land. So there's different quality levels there. I have there's one question here that snuck over on chat again. Remind people to ask your questions on Q&A, but it says, have you heard about people infusing honey with cannabis for medicine? I've heard that people charge much for this. I've infused honey with hyssop that I grow for sore throats. Plus, it's a great subtle taste. So, and then the states, we're seeing more and more of the states now, they're legalizing cannabis. So,
we're not legal.
Yeah, it's not legal here yet. Some people are just starting to grow medicinal cannabis here. I'm sure that this is possible. I've certainly tasted many beautiful infused honeys, and hey, it's got to be a way to go if it works for people. It's another way of marketing your honey if you're in the right states by the sounds.
Yes,
so,
it is.
Certainly, you know, we used to know about marijuana cookies and things like that. So why not?
Yeah. So I have one other specific question. I'm notorious because in the United States, when I go to different states and so on, oftentimes as a speaker, they invite me to judge their honey. And to this day, I have never judged honey in the U.S. because in the U.S., taste has nothing to do with honey judging. And I personally think that's terrible from a marketing standpoint. I mean, I don't buy wine because, I wouldn't ever buy a bottle of wine that didn't know something about the taste. So
taste has to be part of it without a doubt. And, you can look at things and it can meet all sorts of wonderful criteria. But if it doesn't taste good, well, albeit if it's medicinal honey that's going on a wound, then taste is not important. But there is certainly taste at the end of the day is important. And we always ensure that taste is part of our judging. And internationally at the World Honey Awards, and I've been fortunate enough to judge in many countries around the world, both hemispheres. And at the end of the day, taste is important. It is very important. And if you've got a honey that, for whatever reason, doesn't taste so good, that's when we need to look at other added values. It might well be that this is the ideal honey to use for skincare products or for bubble bath or some such thing. So just think outside the box a bit on that, how you're going to market it. And I think if you're tasting honey and you're trying to imagine where you can grow this honey into, try doing a blind taste test. Literally putting a blindfold on, tasting it and various honeys and thinking, what does this actually evoke in my brains? What am I thinking here? There are certain honeys that I can taste and it will take me right back to childhood. Picnics that I've had down at the beach or, by a river somewhere and things like this. And there'll be ways that you can start to paint a picture and see that you can add value. And that's where someone with a product development or a marketing background like myself can look at a product and think, nah, it's not just honey that's going on the toast in the morning or in the lemon drink if you've got a sore throat. We can actually grow this idea and sell this story, this whole story to your customer.
I think I will beg your indulgence for one last question from me. I teach these online courses. They have taken off phenomenally. We have students from North America, obviously, but we have students as far away as New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, Nepal. It amazes me where they're coming from. And so one of the things that I wrestle with, because I have this innate sense that marketing honey where taste isn't important or isn't considered is really a bad way to go. But you personally are known as a honey taster or sensory expert on honey. I know a little bit about what they do in the wine industry and so on, but is there any standardization of that? Is it a very personal thing? How does somebody emulate or learn to do what you're doing?
Honey sensory analysis. It's lots of sweet talk and lots of tasting honey. I worked as a food and a honey judge prior to coming into this industry, and yes, you have to spend a lot of time tasting and learning how to record what you're actually tasting, how to be able to write that down. What are the the flavors, just like, you know, we've all heard those very flowery descriptions of wines, and we can do this with honey as well, so that it's having that memory to think. I picked up a honey recently, and the beekeeper was totally blown away. I was at a local farmer's market and I tasted a honey on a stand, and I stopped and I said, that honey's come from the mouth of the Waikato River, hasn't it? And the beekeeper said, yes, it has. And he normally keeps his hives 200 kilometres away from this. He said, how did you know that? And I had tasted that honey 20 years ago, and it was one that just stood out to me, and I was able to do that. You know, I had a memory of that particular honey. There's no easy option, but it's certainly about, you know, learning how to memorize flavors. And at the end of the day, of course, it's a bit like art. Some people like this one, some people like that. So when I put together a judging panel, for instance, we have our national honey competition in New Zealand next week. So I ensure that we have judges from the North Island and from the South Island amongst that panel, so that we don't get any regional taste preferences. Because of course you get used to your own stuff and you think this is good. So we have judges from across the region and different experience, and then we total up and average out our marks so that there's no bias at all on those results.
Maureen, you haven't discussed, or we haven't discussed, how the tongue tastes the honey.
Yeah, well, there's new scientific evidence coming out saying that the traditional way of tasting at the front and the back and the sides is, and you know, where you taste your sweet and your salty, they're saying that's absolute nonsense, and everybody's a little bit different to that. But when I taste a honey, first of all, I'm looking at it very carefully before I even open the jar. The aroma that we get as soon as we open that lid is very important, because your nose and your taste buds all working together. So, you know, that's a first indication of what's happening. And often you can pick up faults just on the nose, you know, major faults like fermentation, but also things like chemical faults that might be in there, perhaps from varroa treatments, thymol coming through, too much smoke, things like this will straight away be evident on the nose before you even taste it. And then you've got your first taste, you've got your mid-palate and how it runs off your tongue, what that experience is, whether it's coating the roof of your mouth, and then of course how it's going down. Not like wine that you spit out, you actually have to ingest the honey, and then I will wait and actually look for the longevity of that flavour. What's it like on the aftertaste? Often you'll get, you know, a bitterness that will come back perhaps at the end that's unpleasant, or conversely, of course, it can have a glorious aftertaste that goes on, and it's like, oh wow, that's amazing. You know, I want more of that. So these are all things that add to your perception of how you grade that honey.
Maureen, do we have any invasive weeds that produce significant amounts of honey for sale?
In New Zealand?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a few that are quite significant. Things like, well, down your way, the fennel that we were tasting recently, this grows wild and is very distinctive. Up my way, you'll have Lotus Major coming through, which is sort of amongst the mint family, and it will be quite distinctive when you're getting and tasting that. Yes, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, there are things that come through. But weeds are wonderful. I like weeds. You know, there's lots of wonderful medicinal properties and traditional remedies that come from plants that now are called weeds, which have just no plants of weed. They're all good. It's just that, you know, you've got too many of them growing in an area that, you know, you didn't want that volume. So, and they can become invasive, of course, and you know, people can get very precious about what are indigenous plants from a particular region. But
we have thyme and borage.
Thyme and borage, of course, that grow wild in the high country. Thyme honey is very interesting because there are very few places in the world that have thyme honey, but extremely distinctive aroma and flavour. Thyme honey's traditionally from the Mediterranean, but I've tasted excellent thyme honey in Morocco as well. And we have an area, Central Otago near Queenstown, that a lot of people are familiar with, our mountain playground of Queenstown. And we get thyme honey through that area. And it's an amazing honey, but very, very distinctive.
Frank, I think we've had Maureen on for almost an hour. So if you got a last question,
the other one. The last question I was looking at is a marketing question from a standpoint. People love chemical-free from a healthy bees. Do we take advantage of that in our marketing?
You need to, without a doubt. And this is a real point of difference with food. You know, I know as a mother, when I go shopping, I want to give my family and those that I love the healthiest food that I can. So if you can market that as a healthy, especially if it's in a chemical-free, non-GMO area, I mean, this is a huge advantage. Make sure that you utilise that. But everything you do, if you can show that how you're processing your honey, that you're being very respectful, you're using perhaps organic products to do all your cleaning, everything right down. My own business originally used to be all organic certified, so even our uniforms were washed organically. These are things that you need to tell your consumer. They will appreciate that, and it adds value to your product. Things that you just might take for granted, stand back and think about it. What would my customer think of what I'm doing? And if you think they wouldn't think too much of it, maybe you should be changing your processes and thinking how you could actually improve that for your customers.
All right, I think we should thank Maureen for a wonderful presentation, and Frank, you were great as you know, it's right choice in terms of questions because you represent the production side of it and know the New Zealand markets pretty well and so on. And you also have a lot of experience here in the U.S. of kind of understanding how we market our honey and so on. So I think it's been a delightful evening. At least I greatly enjoyed it. And it looks like from some of the chat comments and so on that others did too. So so you'll see, you know, people saying it was a great program and so on. So that's tribute to the three of you. It was great to visit New Zealand for a bit tonight, and I really appreciate this. And Maureen, we have recorded these, so we'll be posting them on our website. But I may be getting back to you and talking about how we might incorporate some of what your knowledge into some of the courses that we offer. So